Today's video, I'm going to go through my top 4 winter jobs to do. These jobs will ensure that you get off to the best start next growing season. Right, so first job I think everyone should be doing is planning their garden for next year. And this is a really nice job to do on a rainy, cold day indoors with a cup of tea and spending an afternoon mapping out your garden. Now the first thing I would do, and this is my approach, and lots of you might have a different way of planning your garden, and that's fine, there's no right or wrong, but I'm going to quickly talk through how I do it. So the first thing I do is I draw out my beds to scale. The reason I do this for scale is it helps me with planning spacing, so I know roughly how many plants to go in. So I'll show you my map now, and as you can see, I've got the sort of large 11-foot, 3-foot bed, which is the one that has the bird mesh over it. I've then got my two 8-foot by 4-foot beds with the trellis that goes in the middle. And then at the bottom, I've got a 6-foot by 3-foot bed, which currently has the garlic in. Now I have drawn in red a 3-foot by 3-foot bed, which I'm thinking of building, and there'll be more on that in a different video. Now, the next thing to consider before you start putting in your plants is to map out the orientation of your garden. Is it south facing, west facing, east facing? And that's really important because that will help you plan, that will help you scope out where you can plant the taller plants. So your beans, sweet corn, peas, things like that, things that take up a lot of height because you don't want to shade the plants behind it. Now, what I would advise is drawing out this and then making 10, 12 copies, one for each month basically. I say 10 because I think December, January, the garden doesn't really change very much, so I wouldn't worry about those months, but at least 10 copies. And then basically start off by writing in the plants that you want to grow. So this year, I know in this 6-foot by 3-foot bed, once the garlic's coming up in June, I want to plant my sweet corn in there. And then in July, when that sweet corn's a bit bigger, I'm going to grow beans up the sweet corn. And it's quite an interesting thing, more on that in another video. But that means that I know in June I've got to harvest the garlic and plant out the sweet corn. And this helps me with planning because that means I've got to sow the seeds of the sweet corn in May time, which is perfect. Chance of frost is going, it's a good time to be sowing your sweet corn. So that's just one example of succession planning and how this planning can help. Now, lots of people, if you're a really experienced gardener, you might find you don't need to plan your garden. You might sort of be able to keep these things in your head. But if you're a new gardener, it's definitely worth doing this, I think, as a winter job. The next winter job might surprise some of you, but there is quite a few different things you can sow in winter. Now, the sort of caveat to that is that you're going to have to start the seeds off indoors, probably in your house, somewhere where there's a bit of heat. Now, I'll put up a list of things that you can possibly start sowing in the sort of winter months. Winter months here in the UK, December, January and February. So particularly in January and December, a lot of people start off their onions from seeds, and this is to ensure that there's enough growing period for those onions to get really big. Now, onions are quite cold hardy, so once they get to a reasonable size, you can even move them out into sort of an unheated greenhouse. Another seed that you can all start off in January, and that I've had really good experience with, is broad beans. You start those off in January under cover, or again in your house. Grow them up until they're putting on a little bit of side, and I would suggest moving them outside. What you don't want to do this time of year is to mollycoddle the seedlings too much. You don't want to leave them inside where it's really warm, and then they're going to get really tall and leggy because they're searching for the light. You want to kind of expose them to the sort of slightly harsher conditions so you get a more tougher and robust plant. But definitely a winter job to keep doing is sowing some seeds. So one job you can be doing this time of year is ordering your seeds for next year. Now there's two things I'm going to talk about in this video. One is how to make sure you get the right seeds, and also where to buy your seeds from. So first off, if you're new to gardening, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to buy seeds that have been awarded a garden merit. So how you'll know that is when you look at the seed packet, or when you look online, it will say, and it might have a little logo with an AGM in it. And what that means is that the Royal Horticultural Society have tested this variety against a load of other varieties, and that particular variety has been the winner in that it's produced the most sort of reliable, consistent crop, when sort of grown in sort of identical conditions compared to other varieties. So for a gardener, that probably means that although your conditions might not be ideal, you've got a pretty robust sort of plant now, which is going to give you a good harvest, hopefully. So look out for those. And it's not a case of having to sort of go out searching for these varieties. The RHS have actually got a really nice list on their website, which I'll put a picture up on the screen, that you can sort of go to, and you can, you know, pick out certain varieties. They'll just sort of name different things. And yeah, you'll be able to hopefully find some nice sort of AGM varieties to try out. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is buying your seeds, where to buy your seeds from. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to the garden centre, picking out seeds, but there's two slight drawbacks from that. One is you're only going to sort of be finding the sort of fairly common varieties. And the second thing is, depending on the garden centre, you might end up paying quite a lot for your seeds. And, you know, seeds aren't particularly expensive, but, you know, there is a saving to be had potentially if you look online. Now, garden centres will do all the typical varieties of like Thompson Morgan, Mr. Fothergill's, etc. And these are well-known seed companies who will, you know, send you seeds which have a high germination rate and have, you know, been properly stored and looked after. Now, there's two websites though that I do recommend if you are looking for it to, you know, for a wider variety of seeds to buy. Number one is Simply Seed. Now, Simply Seed has got a really lovely, user-friendly website, and there's lots of benefits of Simply Seed. One is you've got a lot more varieties in your typical garden centre. The seeds are generally cheaper, from what I can see, and on your purchases, if you set up an account, they give you cash back on your purchases as well. So you've got, you know, sort of good value seeds and you're getting cash back. So, you know, it makes buying the seeds a lot cheaper and things. But yeah, it's a brilliant website and it's really easy to use. And yeah, I Simply Seed is a great place to go. The second one I recommend is for if you're looking for something a bit more kind of exotic. And I don't mean exotic as in, you know, sort of halfway around the world. I mean more exotic in terms of their sort of heritage heirloom varieties of seeds that you won't commonly find elsewhere. So they're based in Wales and they grow their own seeds, they harvest their own seeds, and then they package them and send them. They're quite a small company. But the best thing about this company, and you will pay a little bit more for your seeds for this, but is that they specialize in open pollinated seeds from, you know, really old, sort of quite rare varieties. So if you're interested in doing that, and if you're maybe interested in saving your own seeds, Real Seeds are brilliant for this because they're not using any genetically modified seeds. They're not using any F1 hybrids. So you can just save seeds directly from the plants that you would be growing. So those two websites, if you're not used to using these websites, or if you always typically go to a garden centre, I would definitely at least have a browse on those websites first, just to get a feel of, you know, what else is out there before you buy your seeds for next year. So the final job I want to talk about, and it's one that's probably most often overlooked, is to make sure that in the winter months, when the garden's quite quiet and not much is changing, to look back at the previous growing season and reflect a bit on things that went well and things that didn't go well. I think, you know, this is something that quite a lot of us might make the same mistakes over and over again because we're, I don't know, for example, keen to squash in as many plants as we can in a certain space. And, you know, maybe it's almost a New Year's resolution that you're going to plant your, you know, seedlings or give them the right amount of space. So I think really important this time of year to make sure, you know, you reflect on things and, you know, try and learn some lessons from what didn't go so well. Right, guys, I hope you liked that video. There are lots of other jobs I could talk about, such as, you know, tidying up your shed or your potting bench and making sure your tools are well looked after. But I think it's really important that you do enjoy the holidays, the Christmas period, and, you know, that you maybe start to think about next year, start to maybe draw up some plans, or at least get an idea of what you want to grow next year. And yeah, I hope this video was of interest. Don't forget to like and subscribe.